So, as Clint Hill goes back to get Mrs. Kennedy and prepare her to come to the ballroom, back at the grand ballroom of the Hotel Texas, the breakfast crowd that was there, about 2,500 guests, there was kind of two interesting facets to the crowd that I think you'd be interested in. One is, ironically, most of the crowd were wealthy Republicans who really did not vote for Kennedy in 1960. Okay, but they wanted to see the president and they had the clout to do what? Wealthy Republicans, they got the tickets to get in. Okay, so that was kind of an interesting facet. He's going to give this breakfast speech at the Chamber of Commerce, and most of the people there, of the 2,500, most of the people there are wealthy Republicans who didn't vote for him in 1960 and realistically probably would not vote for him in 64. Okay? Another interesting facet is that the original invitations that were sent did not have one black person there. Not one black person was invited to that breakfast, other than, I would say, the waiters in the kitchen help, right? And that didn't look good, so organizers got a hold of a local prominent black man and said, hey, want to bring a couple of black people with you to this to make it look a little better? He got a little perturbed and demanded 50 tickets. He said, if I'm bringing one, you're going to give me 50. And the rumor has it that he got his 50 tickets, and there were about that many people there at the breakfast. But that was not the original plan. There was none there. And so the Chamber of Commerce got a hold of this prominent black leader in Fort Worth, said, hey, can you bring a few black people with you? He said, I'll take 50 tickets. They kind of balked, but he ended up getting his 50 tickets. Well, when President Kennedy arrived, obviously before Jackie Kennedy, he was entertained by the Texas Boys Choir of Fort Worth. These kids were hand-picked, kind of like Mackenzie and Soraya were hand-picked to go to your little choir thing in Seattle. Same type of thing. This was a hand-picked boys choir from Texas and Fort Worth. They were called the Boys Choir of Fort Worth, and they were hand-picked to perform for the president. And they were scheduled just to sing one song. They were scheduled just to sing just one song. And that song was The Eyes of Texas Are Upon You. Ever heard that song? The eyes of Texas are upon you all the livelong day. That was the song they were going to sing. Well, because they were waiting for Mrs. Kennedy to get there, they actually performed more than one song, stalling for time for her to get there. And they were kind of nervous because this thing was supposed to start and she hadn't gotten there yet. So after President Kennedy arrived, he was entertained by the Texas Boys Choir of Fort Worth. They were handpicked to perform for the president, and they were scheduled to sing just one song, The Eyes of Texas Are Upon You, but sang another, stalling for time as the president was waiting for Mrs. Kennedy to arrive. Well, they kind of waited and waited, and she didn't get there yet, and finally, with no Mrs. Kennedy, Vice President Lyndon Johnson was introduced to the crowd. And who's going to be introduced to the crowd after Lyndon Johnson? The president. So they're getting a little nervous, they're waiting for her to get there, and finally they can't wait too much longer, and still with no Mrs. Kennedy, Vice President Johnson was introduced to the crowd. Well, he, waved and said a few things, and they were getting nervous, but just before the president was to be introduced, Mrs. Kennedy made her entrance into the ballroom. She was escorted by Secret Service agent Clint Hill, and he walked her to the head table. This is one of the best pictures I have. I'm even going to pass this around to you. This is one of my favorites. This is a picture signed by Clint Hill as he escorts Mrs. Kennedy into the ballroom in Fort Worth. This is a picture that was taken as she makes the entrance. Well, as you'll see by this picture, and this will stick out in your mind from now until through the assassination, Jackie was dressed in a strawberry pink suit with a nubby weave and a purplish blue collar. And you'll see it in the picture. And the reason I describe that is that's going to stand out from this point on, especially when we watch some videos on this of what she had on, very distinct. Okay, so she is dressed in a strawberry pink suit with a nubby weave. Anybody would know what a nubby weave is? I wouldn't say like corduroy, but had a texture to it. Okay, it had texture to it. and she had a purplish blue collar as well. And when you see the picture I passed around, you'll see exactly what she was wearing. Now, after Mrs. Kennedy was seated, President Kennedy was introduced and he began to speak. He was scheduled to give a speech, but he used the old Kennedy wit again. It was kind of funny. He said, now think about what he's saying, you don't have to write down. So Mrs. Kennedy is seated, the President's introduced, and he begins his speech with the following quote. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, 2 years ago, I said that, introduced myself in Paris by saying I was the man who accompanied Mrs. Kennedy to Paris because she was so much more popular." He said, "I'm getting somewhat that same sensation as I travel around Texas." And then he paused and got that smile you just love, and he says, "Nobody wonders what Lyndon and I wear," because everybody had the Jackie do and they were wearing clothes of Jackie. So he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, 2 years ago I said that, introduced myself in Paris by saying that I was the man who accompanied Mrs. Kennedy to Paris. I'm getting somewhat that same sensation as I travel around Texas." Then he kind of paused and smiled. He said, "Nobody wonders what Lyndon and I wear," because everybody was really interested in what she was wearing. He continued his speech by saying this, and tell me what you get out of this. He says, "I don't think we are fatigued or tired. We would like to live we would like to live as we once lived, but history will not permit it." What's he talking about there? Think about that. "I don't think we are fatigued or tired. We would like to live as we once lived, but history will not permit it." What are we living with now that concerns us that we didn't live with before? The threat of, which is a threat of what? From another country. Communism. He said, "The communist balance of power is still strong. The balance of power is still, though, on the side of freedom. We are still the keystone in the arc of freedom. And as we continue to do what we have done in our past, our duty. And the people of Texas will be in the lead, so I am glad to come." So he basically stated that we're in a new world. We'd like to live in a world without communism, but it's here. But freedom still rules, is basically what he's saying. We're still at top of our game, freedom. We're still the keystone in the arc of freedom. And he says, and I think we continue to do what we have done in our past, continue to do our duty. Okay? So it was a very, very good and well-received speech. Well, at 9:50 a.m., after his speech, President Kennedy was presented a 10-gallon hat by Raymond E. Buck, who was the president of the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce. So at 9:50 a.m., President Kennedy was presented with a 10-gallon hat, cowboy hat, by Raymond E. Buck, who was the president of the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce. And you'll get a chance to see this because it was kind of comical. Obviously, when he was handed the 10-gallon hat, what did the crowd want him to do? Put it on. Well, he wasn't going to compromise his Eastern tailored look, to cow country in Texas. And he wasn't a big hat wearer anywhere. So he didn't really want to wear the hat. But they kind of said, put it on, put it on. And he actually looked at Raymond E. Buck and said, "Why don't you put it on?" And, that came. And finally, with the crowd still urging him to put on the hat, he goes to the microphone. He says, "I'll put it on in the White House on Monday." Remember, this is Friday. "If you come up there, you'll have a chance to see it then." In other words, he just wasn't going to put this cowboy hat on and make himself, in his mind, look out of place. So he didn't put it on. And people accepted that. Then, after that, Raymond Buck gave him a pair of cowboy boots. And knowing that the president probably wasn't going to slip them on in front of the crowd, this is what Raymond Buck said. He said, "And to protect you against local enemies in the manner you are protecting this nation against our foreign enemies, and to keep the rattlesnakes on Vice President Johnson's ranch from striking you, we want to present you with this pair of boots." And then he kind of paused, Raymond Buck, and he says, "We won't ask you to put them on here." In other words, he was kind of eluding the fact that maybe you could put them on at the White House when everybody could travel there and see him. So it was kind of an interesting discussion you'll get a chance to see on video. But the president just didn't want to put the cowboy hat on at the meeting, and he certainly wasn't going to put the boots on. Now, with that said, I want to get off task a hair here and tell you that one year when we went to Washington, D.C., we went and saw the National Archives. They display different things in the area around the archives. And one year it was gifts given to presidents during the course of their presidency. And somebody sent Lyndon Johnson a shovel and told him he could help bury all the soldiers that were being killed in Vietnam. Some were negative. Eisenhower had a custom pair of cowboy boots somebody gave him. These things weren't in there, but there was a display. So there is an interest in what presidents are given from gifts. And I'd be curious, I don't know where this hat and these boots are at, but President Kennedy certainly took them as a token of the appreciation of the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce. Well, after that, a final prayer was given to the president, wishing him a safe trip to Dallas, and then he and Jackie stopped, and who did they thank for their performance? The Texas Boys Choir. So they were really kind of taken by them. So they had a final prayer for the president, wishing him a safe trip, the rest of his trip in Texas. Then he and Jackie stopped and thanked the members of the Boys Choir for their performance. Now, it was kind of interesting because one of the members of the choir was a 9-year-old by the name of Gary Bakewell. Gary Bakewell is one of the members. He's 9 years old, and that's about how old these kids were. They were young kids. So, as Mrs. Kennedy and the president stopped to thank the members of the Texas Boys Choir for their performance, one of the members of the Boys Choir was 9-year-old Gary Bakewell. And he tells the story, you'll get a chance to see it. So the president shakes this young Bakewell's hand, and he gets all nervous and he says, "Hi, my name's Gary Bakewell, and I'm Catholic." And President Kennedy kind of got a kick out of him and smiled, and he said, "You know what, I'm Catholic too." That's what he told him. And the president sat down with him a minute, or not sat down, but talked to him and said, "You know, what are you going to be when you grow up?" And the 9-year-old just smiled and said, "I'm going to be a pilot." Told him he was going to be a pilot. Then the president said, "Well, you know, if you're going to be a pilot, you've got to study your math and arithmetic if you're going to be a pilot." Okay? Guess what Gary Bakewell grew up to be? A pilot. And he'll tell you the story. It's kind of an interesting story. Well, at 10:14 a.m., the Kennedys arrive back at their hotel suite at the Hotel Texas, and they prepare themselves for the trip to Dallas. So at 10:14, they get back up to the hotel suite, and they start preparing themselves to go to Dallas. Now, during the time that Mrs. Kennedy was preparing, and they were preparing to go to Dallas, and they were up in their hotel suite, President Kennedy made a phone call. And maybe you can remember this person from I guess it'd be from this year. He called John Nance Garner. If you remember from our lectures, John Nance Garner was vice president under which president? Franklin Roosevelt. And it was John Nance Garner's 95th birthday. And so the president took time when he got back to his hotel suite to call John Nance Garner, former vice president under Franklin Roosevelt, and wished him a 95th birthday. Happy 95th birthday. Garner, as I mentioned, had actually served 2 terms as vice president under Roosevelt. Remember, who was elected to 4. Okay, so John Nance Garner served 2 of the 4. At 10:40 a.m., the presidential party left the Hotel Texas, and they're traveling to Carswell Air Force Base, where they will fly out of Carswell Air Force Base to Dallas. So at 10:40, the presidential party departs from the Hotel Texas en route to Carswell Air Force Base. Well, this is just going to be a short flight to Dallas, but there would be time for a quick, blunt chat with Governor Connally. So as they board Air Force One at Carswell Air Force Base, for the very short flight to Dallas, President Kennedy summoned Governor Connally into his cabin. And what do you think President Kennedy said to Governor Connally, considering what we've talked about and what happened when he got up and opened up the paper that day? What did President Kennedy tell Governor Connally? No, remember what Governor Connally did? A couple things. He didn't invite Yarborough to the head table for the Austin fundraiser, and he didn't invite him to that post-reception afterwards. And President Kennedy said, "Yeah, you know what you're going to do? You're going to get over there and you're going to invite him." So they had about a 3-minute conversation, which the president said, "You know what? Ralph Yarborough needs to go. He needs to go to this party you're throwing afterwards, and he also needs to sit at the front table when I give this speech in Austin tonight with that $100 plate dinner. Now, the interesting thing about that flight is this is re-election time, and everything's big appearances. So is he, is he going to get more attention as he flies into Dallas? 13-minute flight, I think it was, is all. Fly into Dallas or drive into Dallas? What's he going to get more? When he that plane, big Air Force One lands and the president gets off. I took my students many years ago to see George W. Bush when he spoke at the Metra at Billings. And I'll never forget, as we stood online, I'll never forget, like, get goosebumps talking about when Air Force One flew over the top of that building, low, because the rim rocks are right there in the airport. It was incredible. You could see the entire airplane, like you could see it close up. It was incredible. Those kind of entrances are important. So rather than drive to Dallas, they flew 13 minutes. That's all it took them to get to Dallas, okay? All right, so that takes us now to our pink sheet, which is the trip to Dallas. Okay, so if you take that out, the trip to Dallas, and we'll tell you what happened. So we're done in San Antonio, we're done in Houston, we're done in Fort Worth, and at 11:20 a.m., and remember this is November 22nd, 1963, at 11:20 a.m., Air Force One left Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth and landed at Love Field 13 minutes later. There's various times, but 13 minutes later. So at 11:20 a.m., Air Force One took off from Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth and landed at Love Field, L-O-V-E, Love Field in Dallas. They landed about 13 minutes. They say, history says they took off at 11:20 and landed 11:40. You can put that if you want. About a 13-minute flight. It wasn't very long. But we'll go with 11:20 and 11:40. I guess that's 20 minutes, but it wasn't quite that long. So the plane lands in Dallas. The weather had cleared. It'd been kind of rainy. Had cleared. And Mrs. Kennedy and the president get off the plane. They walk down the staircase to the ground level, and they're greeted by Dallas Mayor Earl Cabell and his wife, Dearie Cabell. So as the president and Mrs. Kennedy reach the bottom of the mobile staircase from Air Force One, they are greeted by Dallas Mayor Earl Cabell and his wife, Dearie Cabell. Now, I have been trying forever to secure a signature of Earl Cabell. Can't find him. Guess what I found last week from a guy that collects these things? I found a signature. It's en route, and it's going to go right there. So Dallas Mayor Earl Cabell and his wife Dearie greet Mrs. Kennedy. And if you look at the videos we'll show you, it was at that time that Mrs. Cabell presented Jackie with a large bouquet of red roses, which are going to end up in the floorboard of the limousine after the assassination, one of the most stoic pictures of what happened. So as Mrs. Kennedy and the president were greeted by Dallas Mayor Earl Cabell and his wife Dearie, Mrs. Cabell presented Jackie with a large bouquet of red-stemmed roses. The president then turned, and a wheelchair was pushed up toward the president and Mrs. Kennedy. And in the wheelchair was Mrs. Annie Dunbar. Mrs. Annie Dunbar was in the wheelchair. She was 85 years old, and she was wheeled up to the president, and she told President Kennedy that she was a loyal Democrat and had never seen a president. So somebody had made arrangements for her to get a quick chance to meet the president that morning. As her wheelchair was pushed toward the president, Mrs. Kennedy, 85 years old, Mrs. Dunbar proceeded to tell the Kennedys that she was a loyal Democrat and had never seen a president. And President Kennedy was very nice. He shook her hand warmly, and they moved toward the cars in the motorcade. Okay, moved toward the cars in the motorcade. Now, the presidential limousine obviously had been flown in from Washington, D.C., and its top and windows were removed. This limousine had a regular hard top, detachable, and it had a clear bubble top. And contrary to conspiracy theorist rumor, the bubble top was not bulletproof. Was not. Would it maybe have sprayed a bullet? Sure, but it wasn't bulletproof. Because of the nice weather, the change in weather, President Kennedy, because the bubble top was scheduled, and I think you saw it in one of the videos one time, the bubble top was scheduled to be on, he wanted it off because he wanted to be seen by the public. So the president stated that he did not want the bubble top on. Now this is just one of some examples I'm going to give you of how hard it's going to be for the United States Secret Service to protect him that day, because he demanded some things, and just some things in general would make it hard. I'm going to give you 4 specific reasons why presidential protection by the United States Secret Service is going to be very difficult in Dallas this day. First one I've already talked about. He insisted on riding in an open convertible during the motorcade route so he could be better seen by the public. He did not want the bubble top on. Could the bubble top have protected him? It certainly could have. Wasn't bulletproof, but the chances of it deflecting a bullet that was intended for him was probably pretty good. But he insisted on the the non-bulletproof top being taken off. Okay? Second reason why it's going to be difficult to protect the president that day, because of the large crowds along the motorcade route. It was incredible. He would be a wide open target. There were 12 deep. What I mean by 12 deep is if that wall is the edge of the curb, 12 people deep in line all the way down the 11-mile motorcade route. It was incredible. It was just an incredible crowd. And because the crowds were so large, the president's going to be a wide open target. The third reason, and if you listen to the video, Clint Hill stated this, Secret Service agents who would normally surround the presidential limousine and maybe be on the back even a little bit at times, were pulled off so the president could be better seen, and he did not want that thought of being vulnerable or being a wimp.